Hello friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be doing a video that I have been thinking about doing for quite a while now, and that is a look into how I actually do on my TBRs. And I'm going to go through the past 11 months from April 2021 until March 2022 and basically just see how I actually do. Like when I set a TBR, do I complete it? How much of it do I complete? Do I stray a lot from my TBR, or am I pretty disciplined in picking up the books that I set out for myself? So I'm not going to spend too much time on this introduction because this is one where I'm going to sit down and get right into it. But yeah, basically I thought that this would just be a fun idea to look at what my success has been like and whether I'm terrible or not. So first up, we have May 2021, and I think that I just said that I started in April, but I started my channel last year at the end of April, so I only actually started making a TBR for May. And so what I had on my TBR for May 2021 was A Lot's Away by Darcy Little Badger, The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, Mansfield Park by Jane Austen, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, Fireborn by Rosaria Munda, and then in the 7th slot, I said that I would read either Malice by John Gwynne or The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So this was a total of 7 books for my May TBR. So how did I actually do on that? Well, we don't start off too badly. I was successful at reading A Lot's Away, The Shadow Rising, The Midnight Library, and Malice, but at the time I only read half of Mansfield Park because I started it and I remember it put me into a little bit of a reading slump. I was reading it really slowly and I just wasn't feeling it, so I decided to put that on hold for the time being and I only got through half of it. So I read a total of 4.5 books in May 2021, and all of them were from my TBR. So that's not bad. And then 4.5 out of 7 left me at 65% for the month of May, which when I look at 65%, it doesn't seem that high, but then like 4.5 out of 7 books somehow seems better, even though it's the exact same number because the math is the math. I don't know. Make it make sense to me, but that's an average month, I think. Now, June 2021 was an entirely different story because I, like I said, had pretty much just joined BookTube, I had just joined the Shelf Space Discord, and it was time for the Olympics readathon, which was a massive thing in June, and it was really fun. And it was really fun to plan for, but I made an absolutely massive TBR for that month. Basically knowing for a fact that there's no way that I was going to get through all of those books. So I'm already setting myself up for failure. But there were 12 books on that TBR, so let's take a look at what those were. First of all, I had Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames, The Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan, Jade War by Fonda Lee, The Sea of Monsters, the Percy Jackson book by Rick Riordan, The Emperor's Soul, the novella by Brandon Sanderson, Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, Mythology by Edith Hamilton, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, and The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. It's really funny to me that I had Before They Are Hanged on there because I still hadn't read The Blade Itself. I had it on my previous month's TBR, but I didn't end up even reading The Blade Itself until like 4 months later, and I still haven't read Before They Are Hanged. So spoiler alert for which book I did not finish on my June 2021 TBR. But this turned out not bad in the grand scheme of things, because when you look at what I actually read, I was successful on Assassin's Apprentice, Cemetery Boys, Kings of the Wild, The Fires of Heaven, The Sea of Monsters, The Emperor's Soul, Mythology, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and then that's where we stop. So I also, in the month of June, I read Guards, and I listened to the audiobook for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So in terms of the readathon, that was great. But those last 2 books were not actually on my TBR. So while I read a total of 10 books in June, which was a lot for me, and I still don't think I've read that many books in a month since then, what I actually ended up with was an 8 out of 12 success rate for the books that were actually on my TBR, which isn't bad, but it leaves me at 67%. So I'm still proud of that reading month. Like, I don't feel bad about that. But again, I look at 67% and I'm like, that feels so low. It feels like it should be better than that. But it is what it is. So we move on to July 2021. And my proposed TBR for July was to finish Mansfield Park, which I started in the month of May, One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, A Shadow in Summer by Daniel Abraham, and then I said I would read either New Spring or Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan, because at that point I had not decided whether to slot New Spring in after Fires of Heaven or to continue on with just the regular continuity of the main timeline of Wheel of Time. So New Spring or Lord of Chaos, they take up 1 slot together. And then I had The Sword of Kagan by M.L. Wong, Valor by John Gwynne, and The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. And so I did okay on this one. I'm not upset about how I did in July, because my actual completed reading was that I finished Mansfield Park successfully. I did read One Last Stop. I also started Long Price Quartet with A Shadow in Summer, because at that time I absolutely wanted to be involved in the discussions that everyone was having, and I'm so happy that I did, because LPQ is a favorite series of mine forever now. And then I decided on New Spring by Robert Jordan instead of Lord of Chaos, so I did read that slot. And then I also read The Sword of Kagan, which was on my TBR, and then finally I read The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, the first book in Mistborn Era 2, which was not on my TBR. So even though I had a total of 7 books on my TBR, and I read 6 books in the month of July, I actually only ended up with 5 out of 7 that were on my TBR, because The Alloy of Law was not. So that is 71%, 5 out of 7, which is not too shabby. We're continuously improving, doing better than the months previous, and it's good because we're about to see a little bit of a dip in my performance. But I promise I have an excuse, or a reason. I shouldn't even call it an excuse, but we'll talk about it. So, August and September, what happened? Well, my proposed TBR was The Blade Itself, which you will note is still on there, has not been read yet. The Blade Itself might be my most embarrassing book that I kept putting on TBRs continuously. We have The Blade Itself, we have Valor by John Gwynne, we have Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan, we have Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, which was an arc that I had at that point from NetGalley. We have Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft, Fireborn by Rosaria Munda, Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahiran, which was a potential reread for me with a group of people, and then A Betrayal in Winter by Daniel Abraham, the second book in LPQ. So, what did I actually read in the month of August? Well, I ended up reading A Betrayal in Winter, Senlin Ascends, and then half of Fireborn and half of Under the Whispering Door. So this is a total of 3 books, because I'm just taking those halves and combining them into one whole book. So 3 out of 8 is 37.5%, which is abysmal. But this is the month that I was writing my master's thesis. I submitted my master's thesis near the end of August, and so pretty much all of my time was being consumed by that. And I know that Angela from Literature Science Alliance just recently defended her PhD thesis, and honestly, I salute her for still being able to read as much as she was able to read, like, while she was preparing for this. I mean, she is incredibly impressive as a person, but when I was writing my thesis, I couldn't get my brain to relax and focus on a book, because if I was reading, I was constantly thinking, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing something else. Like, you can be doing more for your thesis. Like, don't relax, we don't do that here. So it's just my anxiety brain, I think. But at least I still got something done. So we move on to September 2021, and my proposed TBR has some familiar faces. We start off with Fireborn and Under the Whispering Door, which I put on my September TBR because I was halfway through both of them. So I obviously wanted to finish them in the coming month. We have The Return of the Blade Itself and Valor. And then, and we also have The Return of Lord of Chaos, because I did not read that either. But additions were An Autumn War by Daniel Abraham, the third book in the Long Price Quartet, and Arm of the Sphinx by Josiah Bancroft, the second book in the Books of Babel. So my actual accomplished reading in the month of September 2021 was that I finished Fireborn and I finished Under the Whispering Door. So again, I kind of packaged those into one book, two halves. And then I did read An Autumn War by Daniel Abraham. I adored that book. It's still a favorite for me. And then I finally managed to read The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. So I read a total of 3 out of 7 of the books on my TBR for that month, and so that worked out to 43%, which again is not great, but in September, much like in August, even though I had submitted my thesis at the end of August, I had to defend it in September. So I had to prepare for my presentation and prepare for the defense itself, which is arguably the more important part. So I did get like slightly more reading done that month, I think, but at the same time, like pretty on par with August. Now, once we got past that, and of course I was successful in getting my master's in science, for those of you who haven't been around for that long, you'll be happy to know, or at least I hope you'll be happy to know, that yes, last September and October I did successfully defend my thesis. But after that stress was out of my life, I did start to do better on my TBRs. So for October 2021, we had Pet Sematary by Stephen King in honor of Halloween month, 21 Things That You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph. We have The Return of Arm of the Sphinx by Josiah Bancroft. And at this point, I had put A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan on my TBR. And I don't know what I was exactly thinking about, because I don't think I had finished Lord of Chaos at this point, but I was like one book ahead of myself in Wheel of Time TBRs at this point. But anyway, that was on there. And then we had The Price of Spring, which is the fourth and final book in the Long Price Quartet. And then finally, The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which is the novella by Neve Vo. So, what did I actually read? Well, I finally read Valor, which ironically I did not even put on my October TBR, but I did finally end up getting to it. I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune. I read Lord of Chaos, which again wasn't on my October TBR, but was from a previous one. I did read Pet Sematary for Halloween. I read 21 Things That You May Not Know About the Indian Act. I was successful in Arm of the Sphinx, and I was successful in The Price of Spring. So I read a total of 7 books, but I only had 6 books on my TBR, and then only 5 of the ones that I read were actually from my TBR. So that works out to 83%, which is pretty good, and I wish that that is where I was at all the time, because I am very happy with that number. So with that being said, we can move on to November 2021, where my proposed TBR, so like I mentioned the previous month, I did the same thing with Wheel of Time, where The Path of Daggers was on my November TBR, when I am certain that at this point I had not read A Crown of Swords yet. So I, for some reason for these 2 months, was just ahead of myself. Like, I don't know what I thought I was gonna accomplish, but I did not accomplish it. And we start with The Path of Daggers on this TBR, and then I had Men at Arms by Terry Pratchett, The Hod King by Josiah Bancroft, the 3rd book in the Books of Babel, Jade War by Fonda Lee, the 2nd book in the Greenbone saga, When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nhi Vo, which is part of the same series of novellas that the Empress of Salt and Fortune is part of. And then for my 6th book, I had just said in my video that it is nonfiction November, so I wanted to put a nonfiction book in there, but I was not specific about what that was because I wanted to just have the freedom to choose whatever nonfiction book I was thinking about at the time. So, how did I do? This is actually pretty funny because I would have had 100% on this if not for the fact that for some unfathomable reason I was 1 book ahead of myself in Wheel of Time, because I read A Crown of Swords, The Hod King, Jade War, Men at Arms, When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, and as my nonfiction book, Atomic Habits. So I ended up at 5 out of 6 once again for 83%, which is great, but I still read my allotted Wheel of Time book, so you could think of this as me being completely successful. I just don't know why on my TBR I had 1 book ahead of myself. For Wheel of Time, it doesn't make any sense to me. But regardless of why I was doing this, I finally fixed it in December because my proposed TBR for December 2021 had Path of Daggers on it. So I finally fixed it. Path of Daggers was my next read in Wheel of Time. So that was the 1st book on my December TBR. And then I also had The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, The Fall of Babel, the final book in the Books of Babel, and then Jade Legacy, the final book in the Greenbone saga, The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, and then I also had Moab is My Washpot by Stephen Fry. And so this was the book club pick for my joint Discord server with Ben. And then I managed to blow by. December is the 1 month where I actually achieved all of my accomplishments. I finished out the year on a strong note, and I am counting all of the books because Moab is My Washpot was actually a DNF for me, but I'm crediting myself for that because I did read it. Like, I tried to read it, if that makes sense. And then I actively decided that it wasn't for me, and so I put it down. But it was on my TBR, and I gave it a shot. So I'm counting that for myself because it's not as though I didn't get to it. And then aside from that, I successfully finished The Path of Daggers, The Love Hypothesis, Jade Legacy, The Fall of Babel, and The Bear and the Nightingale. So those were the other 5 books that were on my TBR. So for my TBR, 6 out of 6, 100% success rate. And then on top of that, I also managed to read Of Mice and Men, Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Haro, and China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan, which is the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians. So I read a lot in the month of December, actually, and I'm really, really happy with that because not only did I not deviate from my TBR, but I was able to mood read on top of that, and it all worked out really well. So after finishing December 2021 with a perfect record, I was completely primed and ready for my New Year's resolution to completely fail at my next TBR. Not completely fail, but on my January TBR, I had Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan, Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding, Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham, which is out now, but that was an arc from NetGalley for me, and then Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. So there was a total of 7 books on that January TBR, and what I actually read was I was successful at Royal Assassin and The Song of Achilles, But then me and Ben decided to completely destroy our TBR plans because after we finished Royal Assassin, we immediately wanted to continue to Assassin's Quest. And Assassin's Quest is a beast of a book coming in at like almost 900 pages. So we did decide to read it, and I am very happy that we did, but it definitely pushed other books out of their slots. So I ended up also successfully finishing Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham and then Winter's Heart for Wheel of Time Book 9. But aside from that, I listened to the audiobook for The Ocean at the End of the Lane. So overall, when you look at what I completed, I read 6 books in the month of January, and I had 7 books on my TBR, but only 4 of the books that I actually read were from my TBR. So that is only a success rate of 57%, which is not great, but Assassin's Quest, I think, can be blamed on the bulk of that, and I definitely don't regret my decision to read that book because I was very, very happy and in love with Farseer when I finished it. So moving on to February 2022, and we are almost there. We're in the home stretch. This is another one where I look back at what I planned for February, and I think that was incredibly ambitious. Like, there are 12 books on this TBR, and I don't think I realized that until I looked back at it. So on my TBR was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, and Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark, and all 3 of those are quite short books because my idea, and I did end up doing this idea, was to make a vlog seeing whether I could read those books in a day. And so those were all short ones, but I did have them in my head as intending to read them in February. And then we also had Feet of Clay by Terry Pratchett, Each of Us a Desert by Mark Oshiro, How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden, Do Not Fall in Love by Jackie Lau, The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which was an arc from NetGalley as well, Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, The Return of Anxious People, and then we also had The Return of the Ember Blade by Chris Wooding and The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. And so I count these as me having put them on my TBR because they are mentioned in the video, but I did acknowledge them as carryovers from January that I would get to if I had time. So on the one hand, yes, they were on my TBR, but on the other hand, I was acknowledging that they were not the priority. And then what I actually finished in the month of February is pretty good. I'm pretty proud of this. So I finished 9 books, and those were How High We Go in the Dark, Feet of Clay, Ring Shout, Piranesi, The Old Man and the Sea, The Girl in the Tower, Anxious People, The Justice of Kings, and Each of Us a Desert. So I had 12 books on my TBR, like I mentioned, and I finished 9, and all 9 of those books were from my TBR. So my discipline in sticking to it was very good in February, and that put me at 75%. So I am very happy with that because 9 books in a month, even when 3 of them are quite short, is a lot for me. So I'm really, really happy. And I think that that is one of the better months. So I'm glad that we're almost ending on a positive note, because for the month of March and the most recent month of reading, I fall somewhere in the middle again. So on my TBR, I had Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, which just came out on April 5th. That was an arc that I had from NetGalley as well. Then I had People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, or like insert audiobook here, because my system has now become to basically just borrow audiobooks from the library whenever they become available. So I will have a few on hold and then I will listen to the next one that comes up. So I had intended for that to be People That We Meet on Vacation, but it didn't have to be. And then I had Crossroads of Twilight, Book 10 of Wheel of Time, Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson, The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden, and then for the last two we have The Return of the Ninth Rain and The Ember Blade. And I just kept putting them on my TBR because I will eventually read them, I'm sure. And so for my actual reading that I completed in the month of March, first of all, I did finish Crossroads of Twilight. That was sort of my big chunky read for the month of March. And then second up, I read Jingo by Pratchett. And so my buddy read schedule with Ben alternates months between Robin Hobb and Pratchett. So we actively decided that Jingo would replace Ship of Magic because with Ben visiting, he didn't have his copy of Ship of Magic, and it was all sorts of just sort of disrupting our plans, our reading plans, not our life plans, because it was very nice to spend time together. But I'm considering that as a book completed because we actively made the plans to change our TBRs and then we met them when we read Jingo. And then next up we have The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah, which I listened to on audio, so that became my audiobook for the month. Then I read The Winter of the Witch, Sea of Tranquility, and Illborn, all from my TBR. And then finally I listened to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and that was unplanned, but a greatly pleasant surprise nonetheless. So I had a total of 7 books completed, but only 6 of them were from my TBR, so that leaves me with 6 out of 9, or 67%. So what am I doing with all this information? I just went through a whole lot of stuff, and I think that overall I'm pretty happy with how I do on my TBRs, because whether it's the fact that I'm over ambitious and then I don't end up finishing everything, or whether it's the fact that I stray a little bit from my plans, I think on the whole my discipline for staying with the books that I set out for myself is pretty good. More often, I'm just not finishing as many books as I planned. I'm not totally going off the rails and reading a ton of different books that I didn't plan. So I looked back at all these percentages and I discovered that my average success rate on a TBR in the last 11 months is 69%, which is nice. But I found that I'm pretty happy with that, and maybe what I'll start to try and do is make my TBRs a little bit shorter. But even saying that, I know I'm the type of person who likes to plan a lot of things and then end up choosing between them anyway. So I think that around 70% is a really good place for me to be. And I also kind of hope that this video inspires other people to do this type of video, because while I was really interested in looking at my stats, I'm also really interested in seeing how other people do too, although it was kind of a lot of work to look back at all my TBRs and figure out what was actually on them. So, you know, no pressure to anyone, but I do kind of want to watch this video from someone else. Either way, I really hope that you found this interesting. Thank you so much if you actually stuck around until the end of this video. I really hope that you did like it. Please like if you liked it, and drop me a comment and let me know what you think. And you can also subscribe if you would like to see more content from me. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday. I have information about my joint Discord in the description of all of my videos, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!